Lily Mercer was counting, not the way children count when they are learning numbers or playing hide and seek or waiting for their birthday. Lily Mercer was counting landmarks: courthouse, post office, hardware store, bank. Four landmarks between the south steps of the Harlan County Courthouse and the parking lot where a silver sedan sat with its engine running and its passenger door already open. She was 8 years old. She weighed 57 pounds. She wore a yellow dress with white buttons down the front, ironed flat that morning by a mother who believed pressing a child's clothes was an act of love so small it was almost invisible, and so constant it held the entire week together. White canvas sneakers with a small sunflower drawn on the left toe in red marker. She had drawn it herself on a rainy afternoon 2 months ago because she wanted something bright on a gray day, and because 8-year-old girls understand in ways that adults have forgotten that a single spot of color can change the whole feeling of a thing. The man holding her right wrist was named Gerald Whitmore. He was 47 years old. He wore khaki pants and a collared polo shirt the color of a clean sky. His hair was parted on the left. His shoes were brown leather, recently polished. He looked like every soccer coach, every Sunday school teacher, every safe and boring uncle who ever sat in a folding chair at a school recital and clapped too loud at the wrong moment. His grip on Lily's wrist was tight enough that the skin around his fingers had gone white. Four crescent-shaped pressure marks were forming on the back of her hand where his fingernails pressed into skin that bruised the way only a child's skin bruises easily, completely in colors that would tell a story later if anyone thought to look. He leaned down as they walked. His voice was calm, almost gentle, the way a man speaks when he has practiced a lie so many times it no longer feels like lying. "Your aunt is waiting in the car, sweetheart. We don't want to keep her waiting." Lily Mercer did not have an aunt. She knew this the way she knew her own middle name, the way she knew that her mother's shift at the courthouse records department ended at 6:15 every Thursday, the way she knew that the peach her mother brought her from the vending machine on the second floor always had a small bruise on the left side because the machine dropped them too hard. She knew it with the kind of certainty that lives in the body, not the mind. The certainty of a child who has memorized every detail of her own small life because that life is all she has and she will not let anyone rewrite it. Courthouse. That was behind her now. Post office. They were passing it. A woman in a blue cardigan was pulling envelopes from the outdoor mailbox. She did not look up. She did not see the yellow dress or the white grip marks or the way an 8-year-old girl's shoulders had gone rigid in a posture that no child should ever hold, the posture of something small that has been caught and knows it. Hardware store. Coming up on the right, a man was loading bags of mulch into a pickup truck. He glanced once in their direction, then away. His mind had already categorized what it saw. Father and daughter. Thursday afternoon, nothing worth a second look. Bank, last landmark. After the bank, there was nothing between Lily Mercer and the parking lot except 40 feet of sidewalk and 163 years of adults who had been trained carefully, thoroughly by every institution they had ever trusted to believe that a man in khaki pants with a calm voice and a child-sized hand in his grip was exactly what he appeared to be. 11 seconds. That was what Lily had calculated. Not consciously, not with arithmetic, but with the desperate spatial intelligence of a small animal that knows the distance between the cage and the open field and has exactly one chance to make someone understand that the cage is not where she belongs. 11 seconds to make someone see her. 11 seconds to convince a stranger that the yellow dress, the whitened grip marks, the rigidity in her 8-year-old shoulders, that all of it meant exactly what it looked like. Her left hand came up, slowly. Not fast enough to startle Gerald, not dramatic enough to draw his attention. She raised it to her sternum, palm facing outward, and tucked her thumb into her palm. 4 fingers curled over it, trapping it. She held the gesture for 3 seconds. The rescue signal. She had learned it 9 months ago from a police officer who visited her school on a Tuesday afternoon and stood in front of 23 second graders and taught them something he said might save their lives someday. Most of the children had practiced it, twice giggled, and forgotten it by recess. Lily had practiced it 14 times that night in her bedroom mirror. She did not know why. She only knew that some lessons felt heavier than others, and this one had settled into her bones like a weather change. The woman in the blue cardigan walked past, 3 feet away, close enough that Lily could smell her perfume, something with lavender, something that smelled like someone's grandmother. The woman's eyes swept across them and kept going. She saw a man and a child. She saw Thursday afternoon. She saw nothing. Lily's hand dropped. She made the signal again, this time directed at two men in suits walking down the courthouse steps. School board members who had passed them 90 seconds ago and chosen in the quick unconscious arithmetic that adults perform 1,000 times a day to believe the simplest explanation. Uncle and niece, ice cream and the park. Nothing wrong here. They did not see. 11 people would pass Lily Mercer in the 90 seconds between the courthouse steps and the post office parking lot. 11 adults with functioning eyes and reasonable intelligence and the full moral capacity to recognize that something was wrong with the picture in front of them. Not one of them stopped. Not because they were cruel, not because they were blind. Because they had been taught by every system they had ever inhabited that men in polo shirts do not take children, that danger wears a different costume, that the thing you are seeing cannot possibly be the thing you think you are seeing because if it were someone else, would have already done something about it. The bystander effect has a name because it is universal, but it has a cost. And that cost was being carried right now in the rigid shoulders of a 57-pound girl in a yellow dress who was running out of landmarks and running out of time. Her left hand came up one more time. Third time, thumb tucked, fingers down. 3 seconds. Her hand trembled. Her eyes swept the courthouse square with the desperate scanning motion of someone searching for a lifeline in open water, looking for anyone at all who might be paying attention. And on the third step from the bottom of the south staircase, a man in a black leather vest stopped moving. His boot had been in the air mid-stride, descending toward the second step. It stayed there for half a second, suspended, while something behind his eyes processed what his peripheral vision had just delivered to his brain. Then the boot came down slowly, deliberately, and the man's hand went to the courthouse railing. Not for balance, because something had just hit him in the chest with the force of a name he carried on the inside of his left wrist in careful black script. Ethan, March 14th, 2007. But first, 11 weeks before this moment, before the courthouse steps and the yellow dress and the third signal that would change everything, Lily Mercer's world was small and warm and held together by routines so ordinary they were almost invisible. The apartment at 3619 Sycamore Mill Road was not much. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen where the faucet dripped on cold nights, and a living room window that faced the parking lot and caught the afternoon light in a way that made the whole place feel warmer than it was. Apartment 2, B, second floor. The stairs creaked on the 4th step and the 7th step, and Lily had memorized both because memorizing things was what she did. It was the way her mind worked, cataloging details, the way other children collected rocks or trading cards, building an internal map of her world so complete that she would notice immediately if anything shifted. Her mother, Nora Mercer, worked in the Harlan County Courthouse Records Department, Monday through Friday, 8 to 6:15, except Thursdays when she stayed until 6:30 because Thursdays were filing days and the filing always ran late. Nora was the kind of mother who ironed her daughter's school clothes the night before, who packed lunches with a small note tucked inside the sandwich bag, who kept a jar of coins on the kitchen counter labeled Lily's College, even though the cow had held $17.40 for the past 3 months, because every other dollar went to rent, in groceries, and the check engine light that had been glowing on the dashboard of her sedan for 2 months and could not be fixed because fixing it cost $400 that did not exist. Nora earned $31,000 a year. She drove a sedan with a cracked windshield and a passenger side mirror. held on with electrical tape. She did not have savings. She did not have family nearby. She had Lily, and Lily had her. And the two of them had built a life inside those two bedrooms, in that dripping kitchen faucet that was small and careful and held together by the specific gravity of a mother's love, which is the strongest force in the universe and also the most breakable. Thursday was their day. Not because anything special happened on Thursdays, but because Thursdays had a rhythm. Nora ironed Lily's yellow dress in the morning. The yellow dress was a Thursday dress. Nora had bought it for the first day of third grade, and Lily had loved it so immediately and so completely that she had asked to wear it every week. And Nora, who understood that children attach meaning to objects in ways that adults find irrational and children find essential, had agreed. Thursday became Yellow Dress Day. After school, Lily walked to the Harlan County Community Center 4 blocks from the school, where an after-school program ran from 3 to 7 for children whose parents worked late. Lily had been going there since first grade. She knew every corner of the building, every crack in the parking lot, every face on the staff. She did her homework at the long table near the window. She drew pictures. She read books about animals and planets, and a girl detective who solved mysteries by noticing things that adults overlooked, and Lily loved those books because she understood the girl detective in a way that felt personal because Lily noticed things too. She noticed everything. At 6:30, Nora would pull into the community center parking lot. She would be carrying a peach from the vending machine on the second floor of the courthouse. The peach always had a small bruise on the left side because the machine dropped them too hard. Lily would get in the car. They would drive home. Nora would ask about homework. Lily would ask about the courthouse. They would eat dinner at the kitchen table, and sometimes Nora would let Lily stay up an extra 30 minutes to read. And sometimes Lily would fall asleep on the couch and Nora would carry her to bed. And the weight of her daughter in her arms was the only weight Nora carried that she never wanted to put down. That was Thursdays. 11 weeks of Thursdays the same, until Gerald Whitmore arrived. He showed up at the community center on a Tuesday in late June, introduced himself to the director as a volunteer, licensed foster care coordinator, director of New Horizons Youth Services, 9 years with the Georgia Department of Family and Children Services, Boy Scout troop leader, hospital volunteer coordinator, neighborhood watch captain, crisis hotline volunteer. His background check came back clean because every background check he had ever submitted had come back clean. And the reason for that was simple. Gerald Whitmore had spent 9 years understanding exactly how background checks worked, exactly what they look for, and exactly how to build a life that would pass through their filters, like water through a sieve, leaving nothing behind but the impression of a man who cared deeply about children and had the credentials to prove it. The community center director welcomed him. The staff loved him. He was patient. He was organized. He remembered every child's name after the first introduction. He brought supplies. He organized game nights. He showed up every Thursday without fail, staying from 3:30 until 5:30, and the consistency of his presence became over the weeks a kind of proof. This is a man who shows up. This is a man who cares. This is a man who can be trusted. Lily noticed him the first Thursday, not because he did anything wrong. He did everything right, and that was the problem. He was too right, too smooth, too attentive. He remembered her name before she told him. He knew she liked to sit by the window. He brought her a book about a girl detective that was the exact series she was reading, and when she asked how he knew, he smiled and said, "Lucky guess." Lily did not believe in lucky guesses. She believed in paying attention, and someone who paid attention to what a child was reading had been paying attention for a reason. She came home that first Thursday and told Nora, "There's a new volunteer at the center. He gives me a weird feeling." Nora listened. Nora always listened to Lily, but listening and hearing are different things. And what Nora heard was an 8-year-old girl describing a man who had a clean background check and brought books and organized game nights, and the distance between weird feeling, and dangerous was a distance that Nora's exhausted, overworked $31,000 a year mind could not cross without more evidence than a child's intuition. He's probably just trying to be nice, baby. Some adults are like that. Lily did not argue. She was 8 years old, and 8-year-olds have learned by 8 that arguing with adults about feelings rarely ends in the adult changing their mind. But she did not stop watching Gerald Whitmore. She watched him the way she watched everything carefully, completely, filing details into the internal map that lived inside her head and grew more detailed every day. She watched him learn her schedule. She saw him note which days she came, which table she sat at, what time Nora arrived. She watched him ask the counselor about Lily's family casual questions, wrapped in the professional vocabulary of a man who worked with children and had every legitimate reason to ask. Single mom. She works at the courthouse, long hours. The counselor answered because the questions came from a licensed professional, and licensed professionals ask questions like that because it was their job. And questioning someone's job was the same as questioning their credentials. And questioning their credentials was the same as questioning the system that issued them. And no one questioned the system because the system was the only thing standing between order and chaos. 3 weeks before the courthouse steps, Lily heard the phone call. It was a Thursday, 5:15 in the afternoon. Lily had finished her homework early and walked outside to sit on the community center's front steps and wait for Nora. Gerald Whitmore's car was parked in the lot 15 feet from the entrance. A gray sedan. Clean. The kind of car that blended into every parking lot in America because it was designed to be forgettable. The driver's window was down 3 inches. Gerald was on the phone. His voice carried in the late afternoon air. Not loud, but clear enough for a child sitting 15 feet away on concrete steps to hear every word because Gerald Whitmore had spent 9 years being careful about everything except the distance between his open window and a girl who noticed everything. The audit request came through records, he said. I know who processed it. Lily's body went still, not because she understood the words. She did not understand them. She was 8 years old, and audit requests and records departments belonged to the adult world, the world of paperwork and forms, and the specific bureaucratic language that adults used when they were talking about things that mattered in ways that children were not supposed to understand. But she understood the tone. The tone was the thing that made her hands go cold on the concrete step. The tone was flat, certain. The voice of someone who was not asking a question or solving a problem, but executing a plan that had already been decided. The voice of someone talking about another person the way you talk about a piece on a game board, something to be moved, something to be used, something that existed only in relation to the strategy you had already committed to. Gerald listened. Then he said, the paperwork goes back through the same office. He listened again. The woman has a daughter, Thursdays. Lily's breath caught. The woman has a daughter, Thursdays. Her mother worked at the courthouse records department. Her mother processed paperwork. Her mother's daughter waited at the community center every Thursday. Then Gerald said the words that would change everything. That's why Jonah Beckett didn't go anywhere. Lily did not know who Jonah Beckett was. She did not know what the sentence meant, but she memorized it. She memorized it the way she memorized spelling words, the way she memorized the creaking steps in her apartment building, the way she memorized the details of her own small life. She repeated the words to herself that night in bed, whispering them into her pillow. She wrote them in the small notebook she kept under her pillow, the one with the sunflower sticker on the cover. She did not understand them. She only understood that Gerald Whitmore's voice when he said them had sounded like someone talking about something he had already decided. And she knew with the same body-level certainty that told her she did not have an aunt and that lucky guesses were never lucky, that whatever he had decided was bad. She tried again to tell an adult. She went to the counselor the next Thursday. She said, I heard Mr. Whitmore on the phone. He was talking about my mom. He said something about a daughter on Thursdays. The counselor looked at her with the patient expression of an overworked woman managing 23 children with 2 staff members and a budget that could not cover both new art supplies and a functioning air conditioner. Honey, Mr. Whitmore is a licensed professional. He works with DFCS. He probably knows a lot of parents in the community. I'm sure it was nothing. Lily understood. She was 8 years old and she understood that she had been weighed against a credential and found lighter. That her instincts, her memory, her careful observation had been placed on one side of a scale, and a background check and a professional title had been placed on the other, and the scale had tipped the way it always tipped toward the adult, toward the system, toward the version of reality that required the least effort to believe. She stopped trying to tell adults. Instead, she practiced the rescue signal. 14 times in her bedroom mirror, the same way she had practiced it 9 months ago when the police officer taught it. Thumb tucked into palm, 4 fingers over, hold for 3 seconds. She practiced it until the gesture was as automatic as breathing, until her hand could form it without her brain giving the order, until the signal lived in her muscles rather than her memory. And she waited. Because Lily Mercer was 8 years old, and she had learned in the 11 weeks since Gerald Whitmore had arrived at the community center that the world was divided into 2 kinds of adults. Adults who listened to children and adults who listened to credentials. And she had run out of the second kind. Now on a Thursday afternoon in September on the courthouse steps, she was looking for the first kind. The man on the third step was not what she expected. He was enormous, 6 feet 3 inches tall, 238 pounds. His beard was streaked with gray. His hands were scarred across the knuckles from work and weather, and 22 years of handling explosives for the United States Marine Corps. His vest bore the patches of a motorcycle club that most people cross the street to avoid, and everything about his appearance, the size, the leather, the scars, the particular way he occupied space, as if the space had been worn in advance, was designed by circumstance and choice to communicate one thing. This is not a man to be approached lightly. But Lily Mercer was not looking at his size or his vest or his scars. She was looking at his eyes. And what she saw in his eyes in the half second between his boot stopping in midair and coming down on the courthouse step was something she recognized. He was paying attention. His name was Silas Crow, 51 years old. He had come to the courthouse for paperwork, vehicle registration forms for 2 chapter bikes, mundane business. The kind he handled himself because he had learned over 2 decades in the Marines and 19 years wearing a patch that paperwork was where problems lived and details were where the devil made his home. 5:47 on a Thursday afternoon. September, the flag above the courthouse snapping in a wind that smelled like cut grass and warm asphalt. And then the movement, small, deliberate, a child's hand rising to her chest, thumb folding in, fingers closing. Silas Crow had spent 17 years learning to see what other people missed. Not because he wanted to, because a 6-year-old boy named Ethan had once needed someone to see and no one had. And Silas had come home from deployment overseas to find that the system designed to protect his son had instead looked the other way, while something happened that could never be undone. Ethan had been placed in foster care while Silas was deployed. Standard procedure for single military parents without a designated guardian. The placement was supposed to be temporary, supervised, safe. It was none of those things. By the time Silas returned stateside and began asking questions, Ethan was gone. The details of what happened lived in a file that Silas had read so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds, and the details were the kind that did not improve with repetition. They only became more precise, more surgical, more impossible to unsee. No one was prosecuted. The case was assigned to a junior detective named Irene Voss, who recommended charges. Her supervisor overruled her. The file was closed. Ethan's name was added to a statistic. And Silas Crow, who had spent 22 years defusing bombs in places where the wrong decision was measured in body parts, came home to discover that the most dangerous explosive he would ever encounter was a system that was designed to protect children and had been redesigned by neglect and convenience, and the specific cowardice of people who chose not to look into a system that consumed them. He had the name tattooed on his left wrist, Ethan, March 14th, 2007, not as a memorial, as a compass, a reminder of the direction he needed to face every morning when his boots hit the floor, toward the children, always toward the children. He had spent 17 years sitting in DFCS waiting rooms, reading case files, learning the specific vocabulary of institutional failure, studying the way terror looks on a child's face when the adults have stopped listening. He had become fluent in a language that no one wanted to speak, the language of children who had been failed by every structure that was supposed to hold them. And now, on a Thursday afternoon in September, that fluency delivered a single unmistakable translation. That child is not safe. He watched for 4 more seconds. He counted the grip on her wrist, tight enough to leave marks. He counted the rigidity in her shoulders, the way an 8-year-old should never walk. He counted the way her head turned fractionally, sweeping the courthouse square like a searchlight looking for shore. On the 5th second, Silas Crow came down the last 3 steps. He did not run. He did not shout. He moved the way 22 years of explosive ordnance disposal had trained him to move towards something dangerous, with purpose and without theater. The way you approach a device that might detonate if you give it a reason to. Gerald Whitmore was 15 feet from the post office parking lot when Silas fell into step beside them. Natural easy, like someone who had been parking his bike around the corner and just happened to cross paths. "Hey," Silas's voice carried the measured warmth of someone asking for directions. Casual, unthreatening. The voice of a man who understood that the next 30 seconds would determine whether this child walked away safe or disappeared into a silver sedan in a future that no one would be able to find her in. "That's your little girl." Gerald Whitmore's head turned. His smile went up. Practiced fluid, the smile of someone who had answered this question before, and had an answer so polished it arrived before his brain finished processing the question. "My niece," Gerald said smoothly. "Thursdays are our day. Ice cream in the park. She's at that age where everything's a production." He gave a small laugh, patient, tolerant, the sound of a tired uncle who loved his niece but found her exhausting in the way that all adults find all children exhausting sometimes. "You know how it is." He said it with the confidence of a man whose entire life had been built on institutional trust. 9 years as a licensed foster care coordinator, director of New Horizons Youth Services, Boy Scout troop leader, hospital volunteer coordinator, neighborhood watch captain, crisis hotline volunteer. Every credential designed to make people stop asking their questions and start believing answers. The kind of line that worked on teachers, on social workers, on the 2 school board members who had walked past 90 seconds ago and chosen to believe it. But Silas Crow was not a teacher. He was not a social worker. He was not a school board member. He was a man who had buried a 6-year-old boy and spent 17 years learning the exact dimensions of institutional failure. And he was looking at this child's eyes right now, and what he saw in them was something he recognized the way you recognize your own name spoken in a crowded room. Terror. The specific, exhausted terror of a child who has tried to tell the truth and been overruled by credentials, who has trusted her instincts and been told she was wrong, who has done everything right and been failed by every adult in her orbit, and is now making one last attempt to be seen by a stranger because there is literally no one else left to ask. "I see you, sweetheart," Silas said quietly, dropping his voice so only she could hear it. "I see your signal." Lily Mercer's eyes filled. She did not cry, but her left hand, the one Gerald was not gripping, came up again slower this time and pressed flat against her chest. Not the signal, just her palm over her heart like she was checking to make sure it was still beating. Silas looked at the name tattooed on the inside of his left wrist. Lily followed his gaze. She did not know who Ethan was. She did not know what had happened to him or why his name was written there in careful black letters or what it cost this man to carry that name every day in a place where he could never stop seeing it. But she understood with the intuition that belongs only to children who have been forced to grow up too fast that this man had carried something heavy for a very long time. She decided to trust the weight. "He's not my uncle," Lily whispered. "I don't know him." Silas's jaw tightened. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes locked into place. He said, "My mom sent him to pick me up from the community center." Lily continued, her voice barely audible above the flagpole rope snapping in the September wind. "She didn't. My mom picks me up every Thursday at 6:30 after her courthouse shift ends. She's never late. She always brings me a peach from the vending machine. She didn't send it anybody." Gerald Whitmore's smile had gone rigid at the edges. The practice warmth was still there, but underneath it, something was recalculating. The mathematics of a man who had been running this equation for 9 years and had never before encountered a variable he could not control. "I tried to tell the counselor 3 weeks ago," Lily said. "He gave me a weird feeling. She said he's a nice man. He volunteers every Thursday. He knows my mom's name. He knows where she works. He knew I'd be waiting." Her voice cracked. A small fracture in the careful control she had been maintaining for 11 minutes, the sound of something that had been held too tightly finally being allowed to break. Silas looked at Gerald Whitmore. "I've seen enough kids this age to know what scared looks like." He said, his tone still conversational, but with something underneath now, something that Gerald's survival instincts were beginning to register as a problem. "And your niece here is as scared as any child I've ever seen." He let that sit for 2 seconds. "So I'm going to ask you one more time, and I need you to think real careful about your answer. Is this your niece?" Gerald's hand tightened reflexively toward Lily's wrist. A flash of calculation crossed his face. The math of a man trying to decide if the person in front of him knew enough to be dangerous or just enough to be annoying. "I don't know what you think you saw," Gerald said, his voice dropping the warmth, now letting something harder show through. "But you need to step back before this becomes a legal issue. I'm a licensed foster care coordinator. This child is in my care and you're interfering with—" "With what?" Silas interrupted. His voice had not risen. It had gotten quieter. The kind of quiet that pulled the edges of the world inward until there was nothing left except two men and a child and a question that only one of them was going to answer honestly. "With you walking her to a car she doesn't want to get into. With you gripping her wrist hard enough to leave marks. With you moving toward that parking lot like a man who's got somewhere to be before someone starts asking questions." Lily made a small sound. Not a word. Just a broken exhale, the kind of sound a child makes when the thing they have been holding finally cracks, and Silas felt it land in his chest like something physical. He knelt, right there on the sidewalk, 3 feet from the post office parking lot, in front of 11 people who were still walking past like nothing was happening. He went down to Lily's level and held out his left hand palm up the inside of his wrist, facing her. The name Ethan, in careful script, faced the afternoon light. "You did everything right," Silas said, his voice impossibly gentle for a man his size, impossibly steady for a man whose blood had turned to ice. "That signal you made, that's why I'm standing here. Nobody's taking you anywhere, you hear me? Nobody." Lily looked at the name on his wrist, looked at his eyes, and decided in the way that decisions are made in moments like this, not with logic, not with evidence, but with something deeper and older and more reliable than either, that this man meant what he said. "3 weeks ago," Lily said, and her voice changed. It became the voice of a child who had been holding something too heavy for too long and was finally being given permission to set it down. "I heard him on the phone. He was in his car. I was on the community center steps." Silas's hand closed into a fist at his side. "He said the audit request came through records. I know who processed it." Then he listened. Then he said the paperwork goes back through the same office. Then he said, "The woman has a daughter. Thursdays." The courthouse square went very quiet. Then he said, "That's why Jonah Beckett didn't go anywhere." She recited it in the careful, measured cadence of a child who had memorized something because she understood that memory was the only weapon she had. She had memorized them the way she memorized spelling words, repeated them to herself at night, written them in the notebook under her pillow. She did not understand what they meant. She only understood that Gerald Whitmore's voice when he said them had sounded like someone talking about something he had already decided. And she knew that whatever he had decided was bad. Silas Crow's blood went cold. Jonah Beckett, the name hit him because Silas had been building a file on New Horizons Youth Services for 14 months. Quietly, methodically, the way a man who had learned to read case files and track patterns did when something in his gut told him that an organization handling vulnerable children that never generated complaints was an organization that made complaints disappear. Jonah Beckett's name was in that file. A 16-year-old who had filed a formal DFCS complaint in March 2021 alleging abuse during his placement under Gerald Whitmore's care. A complaint that had been logged assigned to intake and then administratively set aside pending additional documentation that was never requested and never received. A complaint that had been buried. And now an 8-year-old girl in a yellow dress was standing on the courthouse sidewalk reciting the exact words that connected that buried complaint to an audit that could destroy the man standing in front of them. Silas stood slowly, his full height, 6'3", 238 pounds, the kind of size that arrived before the man did. He looked at Gerald Whitmore, whose face had gone carefully blank. "Jonah Beckett," Silas said quietly. "You want to tell me about Jonah Beckett?" Gerald's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes. The recognition that the man in front of him knew a name he should not know. "I don't know what this child has told you," Gerald said, his voice taking on the measured cadence of someone trained in trauma-informed care. "But I'm a licensed professional. I've worked with DFCS for 9 years. I've passed every background check. And if you don't step aside right now, I will have you arrested for harassment and false imprisonment." Silas pulled his phone from his vest pocket. He did not break eye contact. He pressed 3 buttons. The call connected on the second ring. "Ironside," Silas said. "I need you at the Harlan County Courthouse, South Steps, right now. Bring everyone you can reach in the next 10 minutes. And call Irene Voss. Tell her I've got a foster care coordinator trying to walk away with a child who just told me about Jonah Beckett." A pause on the other end. Then a voice gravelly, steady, the voice of a man who had spent 22 years as a Harlan County Sheriff's detective and knew exactly what that name meant in a sentence that included foster care coordinator and child. "We're rolling." The line went dead. Silas looked at Gerald Whitmore. The September wind pulled at the courthouse flag. The rope snapped against the pole. "You're not going anywhere," Silas said. "You're going to stand right here with me and this little girl until the people who actually care about her safety show up. And then you're going to answer a whole lot of questions about how a licensed foster care coordinator knows exactly where to find an 8-year-old on a Thursday afternoon." Gerald's jaw tightened. His hand was positioned near Lily's wrist, hovering the reflex to grab, battling the calculation that grabbing her now would be the last mistake he ever made. "This is kidnapping," Gerald said. "You're holding me against my will. That's a felony." "You're welcome to call your attorney," Silas said evenly. "The FBI is going to want to talk to them anyway." The word FBI landed the way a stone lands in still water. Gerald Whitmore's face changed. Just for a second, the mask slipped and something underneath showed through. Not the face of a predator caught in a trap. The face of a man who had been running calculations for 9 years and had just realized that the math had finally caught up to him. Not because the system found him, not because an audit flagged him, not because a detective followed the evidence, because an 8-year-old girl in a yellow dress had memorized a phone conversation and repeated it to the one person in Harlan County, Georgia, who knew what the name Jonah Beckett meant. Lily pulled. Not hard, not dramatically, just a small testing tug, the movement of a child who had been holding still for 11 minutes and was now starting to believe she might not have to anymore. Gerald's hand moved reflexively toward her wrist, but his fingers closed on air. Because Lily had already stepped back one step too, putting Silas between herself and the man who had been walking her toward a silver sedan. Silas's voice dropped to something that made the September air feel 10 degrees colder. Don't. And Gerald Whitmore, licensed foster care coordinator, Boy Scout Troop 214, leader hospital, volunteer coordinator, neighborhood watch captain, crisis hotline, volunteer. A man whose entire identity had been constructed from the raw materials of institutional trust and community credibility, looked into the eyes of a motorcycle club president who had spent 17 years learning exactly how worthless those credentials were when the person holding them was a predator, and understood finally that there were some things a clean background check could not protect you from. Lily stood behind Silas. Her left hand rested over her heart. Not the signal, not a plea. Just her small palm feeling it beat against her fingers in the September light. For the first time in 11 minutes, Lily Mercer let herself believe that someone had finally seen her. And in the distance, coming from the south end of town, a sound was building. Low at first like thunder that had not yet decided to arrive. Then louder still. The sound arrived before the machines did. It came from the south end of Broad Street, rolling through the downtown blocks like something geological, something that belonged to the earth rather than the air. A vibration first, then a rumble, then a roar that shook the plate glass windows of the Harlan County Courthouse and set off two car alarms in the post office parking lot and made every person on the courthouse square stop what they were doing and turn toward a sound that the human body recognizes before the mind does. The sound of something massive and deliberate and impossible to ignore. The first Harley Davidson turned onto Broad Street at 5:51 in the afternoon. A black Road King with chrome pipes that caught the September light and threw it back in sharp fragments. Behind it, two more, then four. Then a line that stretched back around the corner and kept coming engine after engine, the formation so tight and disciplined that the space between each bike could have been measured with a ruler. 34 motorcycles from the Vidalia home chapter arrived within 18 minutes of Silas Crow's phone going back into his vest pocket. Dale Ironside Kessler had made 4 calls. The first went to the chapter sergeant-at-arms. The second went to Savannah. The third went to Augusta. The fourth went to Detective Irene Voss at the Harlan County Sheriff's Office. And that call lasted 11 seconds because Ironside said 2 sentences and Voss said 1 word, and then both lines went dead. Within 47 minutes, the count had climbed to 113. Savannah sent 31. Augusta sent 27. Macon sent 21. The remaining 34 were already there, the home chapter, the men who lived within riding distance, and had dropped whatever they were doing because the call had included 2 words that functioned like a fire alarm. Foster care coordinator, child. Certain members did not ask questions when those words appeared in sequence. They did not ask for details or context. They simply got on their bikes and rode toward the GPS pin because every man in that formation either had a story about a child who had been failed by the system or knew someone who did or had spent enough years wearing the patch to understand that showing up was not a gesture. It was the job. The formation pulled into the courthouse square in disciplined rows. They parked one by one in the overflow lot across the street, engines cutting off almost in unison until the sudden silence after all that noise felt heavy and expectant, like the air before a verdict. 113 men in black leather vests stepped off their bikes and stood there, not moving, not shouting, not threatening, simply present. A wall of witness that stretched from the overflow lot to the courthouse steps. Gerald Whitmore's face had gone the color of old newspaper. He stood 3 feet from the post office parking lot with his silver sedan still running and his passenger door still open, and 113 men between him and any future that did not include handcuffs. Ironside came first, 57 years old, gray beard that reached the second button of his vest, eyes that carried the permanent squint of a man who had spent 22 years reading case files under fluorescent lights. He walked up to Silas with the unhurried gait of someone who had been expecting this day for 14 months and was almost relieved it had finally arrived. He glanced once at Lily. Then he looked at Gerald Whitmore with the cold professional assessment that came from 2 decades of reading guilty men's faces. This is him, Silas confirmed. Ironside knelt, not as low as Silas had. His knees carried 22 years of patrol car seats, and they did not bend the way they used to, but low enough to meet Lily's eyes. Lily, Silas said gently, this is Ironside. He used to be a detective. He's going to help make sure you get home safe. Ironside's voice was steady and present, the vocal equivalent of a hand held out, palm up offering without demanding. Sweetheart, he said, I need to ask you some questions. Is that okay? Lily nodded. Her hand was still against her chest. The man who was holding your wrist, you said he told you your mom sent him. Did your mom actually send him? No, Lily's voice was stronger now. The presence of 113 men standing in disciplined silence had not removed her fear. Fear that deep does not remove that quickly. But it had given her fear a container, the understanding that she was no longer alone inside it. My mom picks me up from the community center at 6:30 every Thursday after her courthouse shift ends. She's never late. She always brings me a peach from the vending machine. She didn't send anybody. Ironside pulled a small notebook from his vest pocket, worn soft at the edges, filled with 14 months of notes in handwriting so small it looked like code. You said you heard him on the phone 3 weeks ago. Can you tell me exactly what he said? Lily closed her eyes. When she spoke, the words came out in the cadence of a child who had memorized something, because she understood that memory was the only weapon she had. He said the audit request came through records. I know who processed it. Then he listened. Then he said the paperwork goes back through the same office. Then he said the woman has a daughter. Thursday. She opened her eyes. Then he said, that's why Jonah Beckett didn't go anywhere. The courthouse square went silent. 113 men in leather vests, and not one of them made a sound. Ironside looked up at Silas. Something passed between them. The understanding that what this child had just recited was not the confused fragment of a frightened imagination. It was the precise language of a man discussing how to neutralize an institutional threat by targeting the family member of the person processing his audit paperwork. Nora Mercer's child. Ironside stood. He turned to Gerald Whitmore, whose face was arranged in the careful blankness of a man whose entire professional training had been designed for moments exactly like this. Gerald Whitmore, Ironside said quietly, licensed foster care coordinator, director of New Horizons Youth Services. I know who you are. I know what you do. And I've known for about 14 months that something in your case files doesn't sit right. He took one step forward. Now I know why. Gerald's mouth opened, closed. The charm offensive was visibly calibrating, trying to find the right angle. I don't know what this child thinks she heard. Gerald started his voice, taking on the patient tone of a professional, explaining a misunderstanding. Jonah Beckett, Ironside interrupted, 16 years old when he filed a formal complaint with DFCS in March 2021. The complaint alleged abuse during his placement under your care. It was logged assigned to intake and then set aside pending additional documentation. That documentation was never requested. The complaint was never investigated. He let that sit. The DFCS audit was triggered 6 weeks ago by an anonymous tip. The audit request was routed through the Harlan County Courthouse Records Department. He paused. Nora Mercer processed the paperwork. Lily made a small sound. Ironside's voice gentled. Nora Mercer, your mom. Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face now. The silent kind, the kind that children cry when they are not performing grief but simply experiencing it. She processes DFCS audit paperwork. Ironside continued, his eyes never leaving Gerald's, which means she handled the initial routing for an audit into New Horizons Youth Services. And you knew that. You knew her schedule. You knew she worked Thursdays. You knew her daughter waited at the community center until 6:30. He took another step forward. You targeted an 8-year-old child because her mother processed paperwork that could destroy you. Then a voice cut through the quiet. Female, sharp, carrying the authority of someone who had spent 26 years making arrest decisions. That's enough for me. Detective Irene Voss walked into the courthouse square with 2 uniformed deputies behind her. 52 years old, graying hair pulled back tight, eyes that had seen more than she had ever wanted to and less than she needed to. She and Silas Crow had a 14-year working relationship that neither of them had ever described in terms that would fit a form. She had been a junior detective on the Ethan Crow case in 2007. She had closed it at her supervisor's instruction. She had never made peace with that. She looked at Silas. He nodded once. She looked at Lily. Her expression softened. Then she looked at Gerald Whitmore, and her voice went flat and professional. Gerald Whitmore, you're being detained for the questioning regarding allegations of child endangerment, attempted kidnapping, and financial fraud related to DFCS billing records. You have the right to remain silent. She read him his rights on the courthouse steps while 113 men watched in disciplined silence, and an 8-year-old girl in a yellow dress pressed her hand to her chest and finally let herself cry out loud. Gerald Whitmore was placed in the back of a patrol car at 6:14 in the evening, his hands cuffed behind his back, his frameless glasses sitting crooked on his face. The drive to the Harlan County Sheriff's Office took 7 minutes. He spent 6 of them staring out the window at the line of motorcycles following 3 car lengths behind, maintaining perfect formation, engines rumbling like a promise that none of this was over yet. At 6:22, while Gerald was being processed into holding, Lily sat in the courthouse annex conference room with a victim advocate, a glass of water she had not touched, in a chair that was too big for her. The victim advocate, a woman named Carlene who had been doing this work for 11 years and still had not learned how to do it without crying afterwards, sat across from her and asked if she needed anything. Lily shook her head. She was waiting for one thing and one thing only. At 6:29, Nora Mercer's sedan skidded into the courthouse parking lot at a speed that left rubber on the asphalt. She had run 4 red lights. She had received a call from Detective Voss containing 9 words. Your daughter is safe. Come to the courthouse now. She arrived to find Lily in the conference room, surrounded by people she did not know in a building she worked in every day, but had never seen from this angle, the angle of a mother who had almost lost her child in the place where she processed paperwork. Nora dropped to her knees and held Lily so tightly the girl's ribs ached. And for the first time in 11 weeks since the day Gerald Whitmore had started volunteering at the community center, and Lily had come home saying a new helper gave her a weird feeling, Nora Mercer let herself believe her daughter's instincts over a man's credentials. I should have listened, Nora whispered into Lily's hair. Baby, I should have listened. You're listening now, Lily said. And somehow that was enough. Silas stood outside the conference room with Ironside watching through the small window in the door as mother and daughter sat together. He did not go in. This was not his moment. His job had been to see the signal, to show up, to make sure the child who had been counting landmarks got to stop counting and start breathing. We need to get to the clubhouse, Ironside said quietly. There's work to do. Silas nodded. He looked at Lily one more time through the glass. She was holding her mother's hand with her left hand, the one that had made the signal, and her right hand was cradled in her lap, the wrist already starting to swell and darken. She was not looking at the door. She was not watching the clock. She was just sitting with her mother in a room that smelled like institutional coffee, and for the first time in 11 weeks, her shoulders were not rigid. Silas turned away. There would be time to check on her later. Right now, there was a file folder in the back of Ironside's Crown Victoria that held 14 months of questions, and tonight, for the first time, those questions were going to get answers. The Vidalia Clubhouse sat on a stretch of County Road 12, 7 miles outside town. A low brick building with a gravel parking lot and a sign that read private property in letters big enough to be read from the highway. By 7:30 that evening, the parking lot held 113 motorcycles, 3 pickup trucks, and Ironside's 2004 Crown Victoria that had 247,000 miles on it and refused to die. Inside the main room smelled like motor oil and coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. A long table dominated the center-scarred wood that had absorbed 2 decades of chapter business, and the kind of conversations that happened when 10 men who had seen too much sat down together and tried to figure out what to do about it. Silas stood at the head of the table. Around him sat the men who had been first to arrive and last to leave. The inner circle, the men who had been building this case in quiet rooms and late-night phone calls for 14 months. Ironside, 57, the institutional memory, the man who could recite DFCS complaint procedures from memory because he had spent 22 years watching those procedures fail children. Gage Odom, 63, former Army combat medic who had brought the trauma kit he kept strapped under his rear fender and had examined Lily's wrist at the courthouse with a gentleness that made Nora cry. Not because of what he found, because of how carefully he touched her daughter's skin while finding it. Parrish Hayes, 49, former Harlan County Middle School counselor who had resigned in 2018 after reporting a student's abuse to administration and watching it get routed to the school board's legal team instead of DFCS. He had worn the patch for 6 years. He had never stopped being a counselor. Circuit Pardo, 29, youngest full patch member, former IT contractor who could trace a financial paper trail faster than most people could spell the word fraud. His laptop was already open. Anvil Murdoch, 71, founding member, a man whose own son had been placed in state foster care in 1994 and had never been located after the placement ended. 27 years of not knowing. When Silas had called and said what Gerald Whitmore was, Anvil had not said a word on the phone. He had just shown up. Silas laid the file folder on the table. Gerald Whitmore, Silas said, 47 years old, licensed foster care coordinator, director of New Horizons Youth Services, 9 years with DFCS, Boy Scout troop leader, hospital volunteer, crisis hotline volunteer, clean background check, spotless reputation. He paused. And a predator who's been stealing from the state and targeting children for close to a decade. The room went quiet. Lily Mercer heard him on the phone 3 weeks ago. Silas continued. He said the audit request came through records. He knew who processed it. He knew the paperwork went back through the same office. And he knew that office belonged to Nora Mercer, Lily's mother. Ironside pulled documents from the folder. DFCS triggered an audit 6 weeks ago based on an anonymous tip. The tip flagged inconsistencies in New Horizons billing records, specifically stipend payments for children who weren't in active placements. How much, Parrish asked. That's what we need Circuit to tell us, Ironside said. I've had suspicions for 14 months, but suspicions don't hold up in court. Numbers do. Circuit's fingers were already moving on his keyboard. Give me Whitmore's full legal name and date of birth. Ironside slid a sheet across the table. Gerald Eugene Whitmore, February 11, 1977. New Horizons Youth Services is registered as a 501c3. IRS filings show annual revenue of $312,000. Circuit's fingers moved. The room waited. 30 seconds passed. The only sound was the keyboard and the coffee maker ticking in the corner. Then Circuit's expression changed. Got something, he said quietly. New Horizons operating account shows monthly transfers of $4,200 to a personal account in Whitmore's name, dating back to January 2017. He pulled up another window. That's $50,400 per year, times 7 years. His fingers tapped. $352,800 in personal transfers from a nonprofit operating account. That's embezzlement, Parrish said. That's just what I found in 45 seconds, Circuit replied. Give me an hour and I'll give you the full map. Silas leaned forward. What about Jonah Beckett? Can you find the billing records for his placement? Circuit's fingers moved again. A minute passed, then 2. Found him, Jonah Andrew Beckett, born June 3, 2004, placed with New Horizons Youth Services under Whitmore's coordination from September 2019 through March 2021, age during placement 14 to 16. He scrolled down. Here's where it gets ugly. According to DFCS billing records, Whitmore collected placement stipends for Jonah from September 2019 through August 2023. The room went still. Jonah aged out in March 2021, Ironside said slowly. That's when he filed the complaint. And Whitmore kept billing for him for 2 more years, Circuit confirmed. At $1,850 per month, that's $22,200 per year, times 2.4 years. $53,000 in fraudulent billings for one child who wasn't even in the system anymore. Anvil stood up, walked to the window, stood there with his back to the room and his hands flat against the wall on either side of the glass. Silas understood. Some arithmetic was too heavy to sit still for. Keep going, Silas said quietly. What else? Circuit pulled up another screen. There are 2 more names in the billing records with the same pattern. Children with case file numbers that don't correspond to active placements. One shows as aged out in 2020. Billing continued through 2023. He stopped, looked at his screen, then looked up. The other one has a social security number that comes back as never issued. Ghost placement, Ironside said. A child who never existed. Correct. And Whitmore's been collecting stipends for this non-existent child since May 2018. That's 5 years at $1,850 per month. Another $111,000 in fraud. He looked up from the laptop. His voice had gone cold. Total fraudulent billings across 3 ghost cases. $164,280. Add the personal transfers from the operating account. $352,800. That's $517,080 in documented theft from a system designed to protect vulnerable children. The silence in that room was the kind that came before violence or justice, depending on which direction the men inside it chose to go. Silas chose justice. He always chose justice. Where'd the money go? He asked. Circuit pulled up another window. Bank records show several large purchases. A 2021 Airstream trailer, 27-foot purchase for $83,700. Registered to Whitmore's brother's address in Statesboro. He scrolled. 3.4 acres of undeveloped land on the Altamaha River. Purchased under a shell LLC called Riverbend Holdings. Purchase price $71,400. The LLC's registered agent is Gerald Whitmore. What else? 6 years of annual membership dues and green fees at Vidalia Country Club. Total $43,800. Circuit looked up. He stole from children who had nothing, and he spent it on a trailer land and golf. Anvil turned from the window. His face was carved from something harder than stone. How much does Lily's family have? Ironside checked his notes. Nora Mercer's checking account, Jane, holds $1,740. No savings, no family nearby. And Whitmore's documented net worth, approximately $2.1 million, Circuit said, including the fraudulent assets. Anvil nodded once. Then we take it all back. At 8:47 that evening, Silas's phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Crow, a woman's voice, nervous. The kind of nervous that has been building for 3 years and has finally reached the point where holding it costs more than releasing it. My name is Ruth Calloway. I used to work for DFCS. I heard about what happened today. I need to talk to someone. Silas's eyes met Ironside's across the table. I'm listening. Not on the phone, Ruth said. There's a Waffle House on Highway 280. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I'll be there in 15, Silas said. Ruth Calloway was 71 years old. She sat in a booth at the back of the Waffle House with a cold cup of coffee she had not touched and an envelope she kept picking up and setting down the reflexive movement of someone who had been carrying something for 3 years and could not decide whether putting it down would feel like relief or confession. Silas slid into the booth across from her. Ironside stood by the door, giving the witness space and silence. Thank you for coming, Ruth said. Her hand shook. I've been carrying this for 3 years. I didn't know how to. Start at the beginning, Silas said gently. Ruth nodded. She slid the envelope across the table. Her fingers stayed on it for a moment, pressing down as if she were saying goodbye to something she had held for 1,000 days. March 17th, 2021. Jonah Beckett filed a formal complaint with DFCS alleging abuse during his placement under Gerald Whitmore's care. I was the intake supervisor who received it. She paused. The complaint was detailed, specific. It included dates, incidents, witnesses. That boy sat in my office for 45 minutes and wrote 14 pages in block letters, but so careful you would think he was carving them in stone. He was 16 years old and he wrote like a man filing a legal brief because somewhere in his life someone had told him that if you want anyone to believe you, you have to make the words so clear they can't pretend they didn't understand. Her voice broke. My supervisor at the time was Philip Stratton. When I brought Jonah's complaint to him, he told me to set it aside, said it needed additional documentation before we could proceed. I asked what documentation. He said he'd let me know. He never did. Silas waited. 2 weeks later, Whitmore came to the office, had a meeting with Stratton behind closed doors. An hour. When Whitmore left, Stratton called me in and told me Jonah's complaint had been resolved internally. Said Jonah had emotional issues, a history of fabrication. Said the complaint wasn't credible. Ruth's hands flattened on the table. I knew it was credible. I'd read it. I'd seen Jonah's face when he filed it. That boy was telling the truth. I've been doing intake for 19 years, and I know what truth looks like when it's sitting across from me. Why didn't you push back? Silas asked. Not accusing, just asking. Because I was 58 years old and 6 months from retirement. Ruth's voice went quiet. Because Philip Stratton had the power to make my pension disappear. Because I convinced myself that someone else would catch it. That the system had safeguards. That one buried complaint wouldn't matter in the long run. She looked up, tears streaming down her face. I was wrong, and I've known I was wrong every single day for 3 years. She pushed the envelope closer. That's my personal copy of Jonah Beckett's complaint. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me knew this day would come. Silas opened the envelope. Inside was a 14-page document, handwritten in careful block letters, signed and dated by Jonah Andrew Beckett. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, the penmanship of a 16-year-old boy who understood that neatness was credibility, and credibility was the only currency he had. He read the first page. His jaw locked. This is evidence, he said. Yes. You held on to evidence of child abuse for 3 years. Yes. Why bring it to me now? Ruth looked at him across the table. Because I heard what you did today. I heard a man in a leather vest saw a little girl's signal on the courthouse steps and didn't walk past. And I realized she stopped. I realized you did what I should have done 3 years ago. You saw something wrong and you didn't look away. Silas closed the envelope. This goes to Detective Voss tonight. I know. You'll probably be questioned, maybe charged. I know. Ruth's hands were still shaking, but something had settled behind her eyes. I don't care anymore. I'm 71 years old. I've got enough money. What I don't have is the ability to look at myself in the mirror. Maybe this helps. Silas stood. He looked down at the woman who had chosen a pension over a 16-year-old's safety and had spent 3 years drowning in that choice. You should have helped him when it mattered, Silas said quietly. But you're helping him now. That counts for something. He walked out. Ironside followed. In the parking lot, under a sky dark enough to show stars, Silas handed the envelope to Ironside. Get this to Irene. Tell her Ruth Calloway is willing to testify. Ironside took it. This changes everything. With Jonah's original complaint and Calloway's testimony about how it was buried, we've got a pattern. We've got institutional corruption. We've got enough to destroy him, Silas finished. His phone buzzed. Text from Circuit. 3 words and a GPS pin. Found the river property. You need to see this. The 3.4 acres on the Altamaha River sat at the end of a dirt road that turned to mud when it rained and served no purpose that any reasonable person would call legitimate. Circuit had pulled the property records and coordinates. Silas, Ironside, Gage, and Parrish arrived at 9:52 in 2 trucks with high beams cutting through darkness that smelled like river water and rot. The land was undeveloped. No structure. No utilities. Just 3.5 acres of overgrown scrub brush and a small clearing near the water where someone had set up a fire ring made of river stones arranged too carefully, too symmetrically. The pattern of someone who needed to find the same spot again in the dark. Why buy land and leave it empty? Parrish asked. You don't, Ironside said. You buy it because you're planning to use it for something you don't want anyone to see. They searched the clearing. Gage found it first. His combat medic's eye for disturbed ground led him to the center of the fire ring where the stones had been arranged in a pattern that was not decorative but functional. A waterproof storage container, buried 18 inches deep, sealed with a combination lock. Ironside broke the lock with a tire iron. Inside, 3 file folders, each labeled with a child's name in Gerald Whitmore's neat handwriting, each containing documents that should have been in FCS case files and were not. Medical reports showing injuries that had been documented and never investigated. Photographs, handwritten notes in Whitmore's own writing detailing incidents he had never reported. And in the 3rd folder behind a stack of receipts, a single document that changed everything. A life insurance policy. Beneficiary Gerald Eugene Whitmore. Insured Jonah Andrew Beckett. Policy amount $127,600. Date of policy February 4th, 2021. Date of Jonah Beckett's DFCS complaint, March 17, 2021. 6 weeks. Gerald Whitmore had taken out a life insurance policy on a child in his care 6 weeks before that child filed a complaint that could have destroyed everything Gerald had built. Ironside's hands were shaking when he closed the folder. He was going to kill him, Parrish said. His voice was hollow. We don't know that, Ironside said. We can't prove intent. The policy was never paid out. Jonah is alive. Because someone got Jonah out, Silas said quietly. Someone moved him before Whitmore could finish what he started. Or Jonah ran, Gage said. He was 16, old enough to disappear. Silas pulled his phone. We need to find Jonah Beckett now. At 11:03 that night, a black sedan pulled into the Vidalia Clubhouse parking lot. Federal plates, 2 occupants. The driver stayed in the car, Special Agent Diana Rowan, FBI Atlanta Field Office Financial Crimes Division, 43 years old, practical gray suit, no jewelry. She walked into the clubhouse without knocking. Mr. Crow, Rowan said, I'm told you have something relevant to an open federal investigation. Depends on what you're investigating, Silas replied. New Horizons Youth Services, Gerald Whitmore, DFCS billing fraud. Rowan's eyes swept the room. And based on the number of motorcycles outside, I'm guessing you've already done half my job for me. How long has your office known about Whitmore? Silas asked. 4 months. We've been building a case, carefully, by the book. 4 months, Silas repeated. And while you were building it by the book, an 8-year-old girl was being targeted because her mother processed the audit paperwork that triggered your investigation. Rowan had no good response. We got her out in 3 hours, Silas said. You had 4 months. Rowan's jaw locked, but she did not argue. The math was the math. What do you have? She asked. Circuit pushed his laptop across the table. Financial records showing $517,000 in documented theft. Ghost placements, fraudulent billings dating back to 2017, personal transfers from a nonprofit operating account, asset purchases including a trailer, undeveloped land, and a country club membership. Rowan reviewed the screen. This fills a gap we haven't been able to close. We had the billing records. We didn't have the personal transfers or the asset trail. Ironside slid the envelope across the table. Jonah Beckett's original 2021 complaint, buried by a DFCS supervisor. The supervisor is willing to testify. Rowan opened the envelope, read the first page, set her pen down. If this is authenticated, it changes the scope of the charges significantly. Silas leaned forward. We have one condition for full cooperation. Rowan waited. Lily Mercer gets a victim advocate assigned before the first interview. Nobody talks to her without her mother present. And the second arrest Philip Stratton, the supervisor, who buried Jonah's complaint that happens this week. Not after another month of paperwork. Rowan looked at Silas for a long moment. We'll be in touch, she said. She started to leave. Agent Rowan, she turned. You do right by these children. A beat. That's the job, Mr. Crow. She walked out. The black sedan pulled away into the September night. Silas stood at the head of the table. The file folder lay open. The laptop screen glowed. Is Jonah Beckett alive? Silas asked. Nobody answered. Then we find him, Silas said. We find him and we bring him home, and we make sure that the boy who wrote 14 pages in block letters because he thought the truth would save him finds out that it did. Anvil Murdoch, 71 years old, who had not spoken about his own lost son in a decade, looked up from the table. We find him, Anvil said. We find all of them. Circuit was already working. It took him 41 minutes. A current address in Macon, a phone number. A 22-year-old man who had been 16 when he wrote 14 pages about what had been done to him and had spent the years since believing that those pages had been thrown away. Silas made the call himself. It rang 4 times. Jonah Beckett, a pause. Who is this? My name is Silas Crow. I'm calling from Vidalia. I need to tell you something about a complaint you filed with DFCS in March 2021. Silence. The kind of silence that happens when someone hears the name of the thing they have been trying to forget and realizes in a single breath that forgetting was never an option. I filed that complaint 4 years ago, Jonah said. His voice was careful, guarded, the voice of someone who had learned not to hope. Nothing happened. They told me it wasn't credible. It was credible, Silas said. It was always credible. It was buried by a supervisor who was protecting Gerald Whitmore. We have the original complaint. We have the supervisor willing to testify. And as of 6:14 this evening, Gerald Whitmore is in custody. Silence again, longer this time. He's in custody, Jonah repeated, arrested on the steps of the Harlan County Courthouse. Child endangerment, attempted kidnapping, financial fraud. Kidnapping, who did he? An 8-year-old girl named Lily Mercer. Her mother processes DFCS audit paperwork. Whitmore targeted the girl to leverage the mother. Jonah's breath came through the phone in a way that told Silas everything he needed to know about what the last 4 years had cost this young man. Is she okay, the girl? She's safe. She's home with her mother. She's the reason I'm calling you. How? Because she heard Whitmore on the phone 3 weeks ago, and she memorized every word he said, including your name. She's the one who told us about you, Jonah. An 8-year-old girl remembered your name and repeated it to a stranger on the courthouse steps because she understood that your name mattered even though she didn't know why. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted 11 seconds. Silas counted. He understood what was happening inside that silence. He had lived inside silences like that for 17 years. Would you be willing to testify? Silas asked. Yes. No hesitation. Wes, I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. I wrote 14 pages and they threw them away, and I spent 4 years thinking nobody would ever believe me. Yes, I'll testify. Good, Silas said. We'll be in touch. Mr. Crow. Yeah. Tell the girl thank you. Tell her. Jonah's voice broke. Tell her if she hadn't remembered my name, I'd still be carrying this alone. And in a small apartment on Sycamore Mill Road, apartment 2B, Lily Mercer sat in her mother's lap in the dark and listened to the distant sound of motorcycles on the county road, and knew in the way that children know things they cannot explain that the sound was not leaving. It was circling, keeping watch. Her left hand rested on her chest, her heart beat against her palm. Steady now, not racing, not frozen, just beating the way hearts beat when they have been given permission to trust again. Friday morning came the way mornings come after the worst night of your life. Slowly, too bright, full of sounds that seemed to belong to a world that had not been paying attention to what you just survived. A lawnmower hummed somewhere on the next block. A dog barked at nothing. The coffee maker in Nora Mercer's kitchen clicked and gurgled and filled the apartment with a smell that meant ordinary. That meant Thursday was over. That meant the sun had come up and the world was still turning. Gage Odom arrived at 6:30. He parked his bike at the curb outside 3619 Sycamore Mill Road and walked up to apartment 2B, carrying a trauma kit in one hand and a plastic bag from the gas station in the other. The trauma kit was military grade, the same kit he had carried strapped beneath his rear fender for 11 years because Gage was 63 years old and had been a combat medic long enough to know that the moment you stopped carrying the kit was the moment someone needed it. The plastic bag held a bag of Skittles. He knocked. Nora opened the door. She looked like a woman who had not slept. Morning, ma'am, Gage said quietly. I'm here to drive you and Lily to the hospital. Get that wrist looked at properly. Nora hesitated. I can drive. My car. Your check engine and light's been on for 2 months, Gage said gently, and you didn't sleep last night. Let me drive. Nora nodded. The drive to Meadows Regional Medical Center took 12 minutes. Lily sat in the back seat with her right wrist cradled in her left hand, and her yellow dress, the same one washed the night before by Nora in the kitchen sink because the washing machine required quarters, and Nora did not have quarters. The examination took 47 minutes. Gage sat in the waiting room the entire time. He did not read the magazines. He did not check his phone. He sat with the bag of Skittles on the chair beside him and the patience of a man who knew that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply be present and wait. Dr. Sarah Kowalski came out first. 16 years of pediatric practice. She had learned to read the language a child's body spoke when something had been done to it. The way a wrist gripped by an adult hand carried marks like testimony that could not be forged. She looked at Gage, nodded once, walked to the nurse's station to file her report. Nora came out next holding Lily's hand. Lily's right wrist was wrapped in a soft bandage. Compression wrap over the 4 crescents where Gerald Whitmore's fingers had pressed hard enough to bruise the small bones underneath. Contusions consistent with restraint, force, minor ligament strain. The report included photographs, time-stamped, documented, the kind of evidence that turned an accusation into a case file. Gage knelt slowly. His knees protested the way 63-year-old knees protest when they have earned the right to complain. But he got down to Lily's level and held out the bag of Skittles. Doc says you were real brave in there, he said. Thought you might want these. Lily took the bag. Her left hand opened it carefully. She reached in with 2 fingers and pulled out a single yellow Skittle. She held it up to the fluorescent light, turned it between her fingers. My dress was yellow, she said, the day it happened. I know, sweetheart. My mom ironed it that morning. It's a Thursday dress. She bought it for the first day of school. Gage's throat tightened. That's a good dress. A brave dress. Lily nodded. Then she put the yellow Skittle in his hand. You keep it, she said, so you remember. Gage closed his fingers around it. I won't forget. He drove them home. The yellow Skittle stayed in his vest pocket. It would stay there for a very long time. At 12:47 that afternoon, Lily sat at the small kitchen table in apartment 2B and ate a peach. Not from the vending machine at the courthouse. This peach came from a bag Nora had bought at the Piggly Wiggly that morning with money she had not expected to have. $8,000 had appeared in her checking account overnight, a deposit labeled Emergency Family Support Fund HA. No conditions, no paperwork, no forms to fill out. Just money appearing the way money appears when someone decides that a family in crisis needs help more than they need to be processed through a system. Nora had called the bank. The bank confirmed the deposit was legitimate. Harlan Angel, Georgia chapter. No strings attached. She had sat on the kitchen floor and cried for 20 minutes. Not the sharp crying of Thursday afternoon. Something deeper. Something that came from the place inside a single mother, where exhaustion and relief and gratitude lived together in a space too small to hold them. Now Lily ate the peach slowly, juice running down her chin, dripping onto the yellow dress, staining the fabric near the second button. Nora did not tell her to be careful, because carefulness could come later. Right now, her daughter was sitting at a kitchen table and eating a peach without watching the front door, without checking the clock, without that rigid stillness that had lived in her shoulders for 11 weeks. The apartment smelled like peaches and morning coffee. Outside, the lawnmower hummed, normal sounds. Lily finished the peach, wiped her hands on her dress, looked at the stain, decided it did not matter. Mom, she said quietly. Yeah, baby. Can I keep wearing yellow? Nora's voice broke. It broke the way voices break, and when the question is not really about a color, but about everything the color represents, about whether the thing that was taken can be reclaimed, about whether a dress worn on the worst day of your life can also be worn on the days after. Baby, you can wear yellow every single day for the rest of your life if you want to. Lily nodded then, and she stood up, walked to the small closet by the front door, and pulled out her white canvas sneakers. The ones with the sunflower drawn in red marker on the left toe. She put them on, tied them carefully with her left hand, her right wrist still wrapped. The laces gave her trouble. She did not ask for help. She worked at them until the knot held. I'm ready, she said. Ready for what, baby? To go outside. The housing situation stabilized within 72 hours. Vernon Hodge, 68 years old, owner of the building since 1987, received a phone call on Saturday morning from Dale Kessler calling on behalf of the Harlan Angels Georgia chapter. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Vernon walked across the parking lot to apartment 2B and knocked. Miss Mercer, he said when Nora answered, I heard about what happened to your girl. I'm real sorry that man got as close as he did. Nora nodded, not trusting her voice. I've been thinking, this building needs a property manager. Someone to handle maintenance requests, coordinate repairs, keep an eye on things. 20 hours a week, $840 a month. You interested? Nora stared at him. Mr. Hodge, I don't have property management experience. You work in courthouse records. You know how to track paperwork and deal with people. That's 90% of the job. He paused. And the position comes with a 50% rent reduction, $340 a month instead of $680. Why are you offering me this? Vernon looked at her. Because a man called me this morning and asked if I'd be willing to help a single mother who'd just been through hell. And because my own daughter was in foster care once, back when I was young and stupid and couldn't get my life together. Someone helped her when I couldn't. Figure it's my turn to pass that on. He held out his hand. You start Monday if you want it. Nora shook his hand. Then she closed the door, slid down to the kitchen floor, and put her face in her hands. Lily sat beside her, put her small left hand on her mother's shoulder. The hand that had made the signal, the hand that had given a yellow Skittle to a combat medic. That hand now rested on her shoulder with the gentleness of a child who has learned that being strong does not mean not crying. It means sitting beside someone who is crying and letting them know they are not alone. We're okay now, Lily said. Right, Mom? Yeah, baby, we're okay now. On Sunday afternoon, the brothers came to say goodbye. Not all 113, just the 5 who had sat at the table and traced the money and found the evidence and opened a waterproof container beneath a fire ring on the Altamaha River. Ironside came first. He brought a folder stamped with the Harlan County Sheriff's Office seal. Restraining order, he said, handing it to Nora. Filed Friday, approved yesterday. Whitmore can't come within 500 feet of you or Lily. Can't contact you by phone, email, letter, or third party. Violates it, he goes straight back to jail. He looked at Lily. You did good, kid. Real good. You remembered what they taught you. You made the signal and you didn't give up. That's the bravest thing I've seen in 22 years. Parrish came next. He knelt and pulled a small card from his wallet. My phone number. You ever need to talk to someone who gets it, someone who knows what it's like when adults don't listen the first time you call me. Anytime. Lily took the card. You're a counselor. I was. Now I just try to be someone who shows up when it matters. Circuit brought his laptop, sat next to Lily at the kitchen table, and showed her the financial trail he had mapped. Not the numbers that would be entered into evidence, just the concept. How money left a trail, how numbers told stories, how even people who thought they had covered every track left evidence behind. You're good at remembering things, he said. That phone call you heard, you remembered it word for word. That's a skill. Don't lose it. Lily nodded seriously. I won't. Anvil stood in the doorway. He did not come in, did not sit down. He stood there with his 71-year-old frame filling the door frame and his eyes focused on a girl who had been found in time. You're safe now, he said. Just that. 2 words that contained everything he could not say about the boy who had been taken from him in 1994, in the 30 years he had spent wondering. It was enough. Silas came last. He stood in the doorway with the afternoon light behind him and an envelope in his hand. This goes to the FBI tomorrow, Silas said, but I wanted you to see it first. Wanted you to know that what you heard that phone call 3 weeks ago, that's what broke this whole thing open. He handed the envelope to Nora. Then he looked at Lily. Jonah Beckett is alive, Silas said. We found him Thursday night. He's 22 now, living in Macon. He's agreed to testify. Nora's hand went to her mouth. He said to tell you thank you, Silas continued looking at Lily. Said if you hadn't remembered his name, if you hadn't been brave enough to repeat what you heard, he'd still be carrying what happened to him alone. Lily stood very still in the living room of apartment 2B in her yellow dress with a peach stain near the second button and her white sneakers with the sunflower on the left toe and her right wrist still wrapped. You helped more people than just yourself, sweetheart, Silas said. You know that. Lily nodded. Silas knelt, slowly, the way a man his size kneels when he is making himself small on purpose. He pulled back his left sleeve. The name Ethan faced the afternoon light coming through the window. I told you I showed up, he said quietly. That's still true, but you did the hard part. You made the signal. You trusted someone scary looking to see you. That takes more courage than anything I did. Lily looked at the name on his wrist. She had seen it on Thursday on the courthouse sidewalk in the moment before she decided to trust. She had not asked about it then. There had been no time. But now there was time. Now there was afternoon light and an apartment that smelled like peaches. "Who was Ethan?" she asked. Silas's jaw tightened, then loosened. The movement of a man whose body was negotiating with his voice about whether the words were going to come out. "My son," he said. His voice was soft, not broken. Soft the way water is soft when it has been wearing away its stone for a very long time and has finally reached the center. He was 6 years old. He was in a foster care placement while I was deployed overseas. Something happened to him, something that shouldn't have happened, and by the time I got home, it was too late. The apartment went quiet. The lawnmower had stopped. The dog had stopped barking. "I'm sorry," Lily whispered. "Me too, sweetheart." Silas's jaw worked. "But you know what? For 17 years, I've been looking for him. Not Ethan specifically, but the child whose signal nobody sees, the one whose voice nobody amplifies, the one who's alone on a street and running out of options." He met her eyes. "Thursday afternoon, I found you, and that means everything." Lily's small hand reached out and touched the script letters on his wrist. Her fingertips traced the E, the H. She touched the name the way you touch something sacred, something that belongs to someone else's grief but has been offered to you for a moment because grief, when it is shared, becomes something lighter than it was before. "If you ever need someone to remember something important," Lily said, her voice small but clear, "you can call me." Silas smiled, not the tight, controlled expression that passed for a smile in his daily life. A real smile, the first one Nora had ever seen on his face. "I'll remember that," he said. He stood, nodded once to Nora. Turned to leave. His boots were heavy on the stairs. His vest caught the afternoon sun through the stairwell window. "Silas," Lily called after him. He stopped, turned, one hand on the railing. Lily stood at the top of the stairs, yellow dress, white sneakers, sunflower on the left toe, bandage on the right wrist. Her left hand rose to her chest, not the signal, just her palm resting over her heart. She did not say anything else. The hand on the chest said everything. "I am here, I am alive. You saw me." Silas nodded. Then he walked down the stairs and out into the parking lot where 112 bikes sat in formation engines, cold chrome, catching the September afternoon. The formation pulled out, one by one. Engines firing in sequence until the sound built to a roar that shook the building and rattled the windows and set off the car alarm on Nora's sedan, which now had a new battery and new brake pads installed that morning by Gage, who had shown up at 6:30 with a trauma kit and a bag of Skittles, and the understanding that sometimes the most important repairs were the ones nobody asked for. Lily pressed her hand to the glass. Watch the formation turn onto the county road. Watch the last bike pause at the intersection. Watch Silas look back once a small turn of his head, barely visible from the second floor. He nodded. Then the formation disappeared down the county road into distance that smelled like motor oil in September and something that felt like safety. Not the fragile safety of locked doors and restraining orders, but the deeper safety that comes from knowing that somewhere out there, someone is paying attention. 6 months later, on a Wednesday morning in early March, Lily Mercer stood at a podium in the Harlan County Primary School auditorium and taught 300 children how to make a signal that could save their lives. She wore a yellow dress, a new one slightly different cut, bought with money Nora had earned from 2 jobs, and the pride of a woman who had learned that accepting help and building independence were not opposite things but parallel ones. White sneakers with a fresh sunflower on the left toe. Lily redrew it every few months when the marker faded because some things were worth maintaining. Principal Hernandez had asked her 3 weeks ago if she would be willing to give a presentation about personal safety. Lily had said yes before her mother could say no. "Good morning, students and parents," Principal Hernandez said. "Today we have a very special assembly about personal safety. We're going to learn about the rescue signal, a silent way to ask for help when you're in danger. And we have a very brave young lady here to teach you. Please welcome Lily Mercer." Applause filled the auditorium. Lily walked to the microphone. The lights were bright. The crowd was bigger than she had expected. For a moment, panic threatened. The same panic that had lived in her chest for 11 weeks while Gerald Whitmore watched her and learned her patterns and calculated his approach. Then she saw her mother in the front row, pressing her hand to her heart. And somehow that gave Lily the courage to begin. "Hi," she said. Her voice was small but clear. "My name is Lily, and I'm in third grade. 6 months ago, something scary happened to me." The auditorium went silent. "A man who volunteered at my after-school program tried to take me. He told me my mom had sent him to pick me up. She hadn't. For 11 weeks before that, he'd been watching me, learning things about me and my family. I felt uncomfortable around him, but I didn't say anything because I thought maybe I was just being silly." She paused, made eye contact with a kindergartner in the second row, a small boy with red hair holding a juice box. "But I wasn't being silly. My feelings were trying to warn me that something was wrong. And the day he tried to take me, I was really, really scared. I couldn't scream because he said if I made noise, he'd hurt my mom. I couldn't run because he was stronger than me." She raised her right hand. The bandage was gone. The bruises had faded. But Lily remembered where they had been. "But I remembered something I learned in a police officer's presentation at school last year. This is called the rescue signal. You take your hand like this, palm facing out. Then you tuck your thumb into your palm and fold your fingers down over it. You hold it for 3 seconds where someone can see it, then lower your hand. It's a silent way to tell someone I'm in danger." Around the auditorium, 300 students began practicing the gesture, small hands mimicking hers. "But here's the important part," Lily said, and her voice grew stronger. "It only works if someone brave enough is looking." She scanned the back of the auditorium, looking for the person she knew would be there, even though he had never said he was coming. And there he was. Silas Crowe stood in the shadows near the exit, partially hidden by the doorframe. He wore a dark suit instead of his vest. Respect for the school environment. His arms were crossed. His eyes were focused entirely on her with an intensity that felt protective rather than frightening. Their eyes met for a moment. Lily smiled. Silas's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "I made the signal 3 times on the courthouse steps that day," Lily continued. 11 people walked past me. They didn't see it. Not because they were bad people, but because most adults don't know what it means." She encouraged the students to practice with her. "That's why I'm here today, to teach you the signal and to ask you to teach someone else, your parents, your grandparents, your teachers, because someday you might be the person who needs help, or you might be the person who can give it." Her voice dropped, more serious, more adult. "Pay attention to people around you. Notice when something seems wrong. Don't just walk by because it's not your problem, because someday you might be the only person who can help someone who really, really needs it." The auditorium erupted, not polite clapping, genuine sustained applause. Lily stepped back from the microphone. Her mother was crying openly in the front row. And in the back of the auditorium, Silas Crowe gave her the smallest nod. Then he turned and slipped out the door. This was not his moment. This was hers. 3 years and 4 months after Gerald Whitmore was sentenced to 14 years in federal prison with no parole eligibility, Lily Mercer walked into the Harlan County Community Center for the first time since the day she had been taken from its front steps. She was 11 years old, 6th grade, still wearing yellow every Thursday. The sunflower on her left sneaker was freshly drawn, the 5th or 6th iteration of the same bright spot she had been maintaining since a rainy afternoon when she was 8. She was there as a volunteer. The new director installed after the previous administration had been investigated and restructured had reached out to Nora 2 weeks ago. They were starting a peer mentorship program. Would Lily be interested? Lily had said yes. Now she sat in the same room where she had once waited for her mother, where Gerald Whitmore had studied her patterns and calculated his approach. But the room was different now. New paint, new furniture, new faces. The walls held posters about the rescue signal, about body autonomy, about trusting your feelings. The community center had become, in the years since the arrest, a place that tried to be what it had always claimed to be. And sitting across from Lily, small and quiet, and clutching a worn backpack, was a 7-year-old girl named Emma Lawson. Brown hair, brown eyes, a hand-me-down sweater 2 sizes too big. Her mother worked 2 jobs. She had not said a word in 10 minutes. Lily recognized the look. She had worn it for 11 weeks. That combination of terror and hope and exhaustion. The face of someone who had been failed enough times to stop expecting anything, but had not quite given up. "Hi," Lily said gently. "I'm Lily. I'm here on Thursdays. You can talk to me about anything, or we can just sit here. Whatever you need." Emma studied her. Yellow dress, white sneakers, sunflower on the left toe, eyes that were kind but not pitying. "Do you know the rescue signal?" Emma asked. Lily's breath caught. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I know it." "Do you?" Emma nodded. "My teacher taught us last month. She said a girl at this school invented it." "I didn't invent it," Lily said, "but I used it once. It worked." Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? Really?" Lily pulled out her phone, scrolled to a photograph saved 3 years ago. The courthouse steps, the yellow dress, the moment after Silas had knelt in front of her. "See this?" Lily said, holding the screen where Emma could see. "This is me on the day someone tried to take me." She scrolled to the next photo, Lily and Silas standing outside the clubhouse after the fundraiser. A small girl in a yellow dress and a large man in a black leather vest standing in the September sun. "This is me with the person who saw my signal," Lily said. Emma stared at the photo. "He looks scary," Emma whispered. "He did," Lily agreed, "but he was the person I needed right then." Because the scariest looking person in a room can sometimes be exactly who you need. She put the phone away. "If you ever need help, Emma, you make that signal. And if someone ever makes you uncomfortable, even if they're nice, even if everyone says they're safe, you trust your feelings." "Okay," Emma nodded slowly. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a piece of paper. Drew something with a red crayon she kept in the front pocket of her sweater. Handed it to Lily, a sunflower. Careful petals radiating from a center, filled in with the concentrated attention of a child making something for someone she had just decided to trust. A small signature in the corner. "Emma, age 7. "That's on your shoe," Emma said. "I saw it when you sat down." Lily looked at the drawing, at the careful petals, at the small signature, at the red crayon that was the same color as the marker she had used to draw the original sunflower on her shoe 2 months before the worst day of her life. "Can I keep this?" Lily asked. "Yeah." Lily folded it carefully, put it in her pocket next to the laminated school photo she still carried. Her second-grade portrait in a yellow blouse laminated at the public library 3 years ago, because some things were worth protecting. "Thank you," Lily said. "I'll keep it safe." Emma smiled, small, uncertain, but real. And Lily Mercer, who had been the terrified 8-year-old on the courthouse steps, who had made a signal 3 times before someone finally saw, who had learned that being saved did not always look like rescue, but sometimes just looked like someone who refused to look away, understood something she would carry for the rest of her life. She was not just the girl who had been helped. She was the person who could help someone else. On a Saturday morning in April, 3 years and 7 months after a Thursday afternoon in September, Silas Crow sat on the porch of his house on County Road 12 with coffee that had gone cold and sunshine that felt warmer than it had in years. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Mr. Crow." "This is Jonah Beckett. I testified yesterday. They found him guilty on all counts. Stratton pleaded guilty to obstruction 3 months ago. Thank you for believing me when it mattered. And thank Lily for me. Tell her she helped more people than she knows." Silas stared at that message for a long time. Gerald Eugene Whitmore, convicted on 17 counts, sentenced to 14 years in federal prison, no parole eligibility. Philip Stratton pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice, cooperating witness, justice. But more than that, validation. For Jonah, who had written 14 pages and been told his complaint was not credible. For Lily, who had told a counselor something felt wrong and been told the man was nice. For every child who had ever been told that their feelings were imagination and their fear was overreaction and their instincts were less reliable than the credentials of the adults standing in front of them. Silas saved the message, added it to the folder on his phone labeled Ethan. Inside were 17 years of memories, case files, photographs, and one by one over the years since that Thursday afternoon, new entries had appeared. A text from Nora, she's doing better. A photo from the school assembly, Lily at the podium teaching 300 children. A newspaper clipping, local girls' presentation inspires countywide safety program. A message from Lily herself sent on her 11th birthday. Thank you for seeing me. I'm teaching other kids now. And now Jonah's message. The closing of a circle that had started with a 16-year-old boy writing 14 pages in block letters and ended with a jury saying guilty on all counts. Silas closed the folder, stood up from the porch chair, walked across the gravel driveway to his bike. The morning air smelled like motor oil and the particular Georgia sweetness of a spring arriving on schedule. The name Ethan on his left wrist caught the sunlight. He looked at it the way he looked at it every morning. Not with the sharp grief of the early years, not with the numb endurance of the middle years, with something that had taken 17 years to arrive and still did not have a name, something between acceptance and purpose, between loss and legacy. He climbed onto his bike. The engine roared to life. He did not know where he was going. He just knew he was going. Because somewhere out there, another child was making a signal. Another row of adults was walking past. Another set of credentials was being used as camouflage. Another complaint was being filed in block letters by someone who believed that the truth would protect them. And Silas Crow would keep looking until he found them. Not because showing up fixed everything, but because showing up was the only thing he knew how to do, with 17 years of grief and 3 hours of grace and a name on his wrist that meant I will not stop. He pulled out onto the county road. The morning air hit his face. Behind him, the porch chair sat empty. The coffee cup sat cold. The phone lay on the railing with the folder still open, waiting for the next entry. That was the job. That was the promise. That was Ethan's legacy and Lily's gift, and the only answer Silas Crow had ever found to the question of what you do when the thing you lost cannot be returned, but the thing you learned from losing it can still save someone else. The engine rumbled. The road opened. And somewhere in a community center on a Thursday afternoon, a girl in a yellow dress sat across from a child who needed to be seen and said the words that mattered most. I'm here. You can talk to me, whatever you need.